Alright, on the last video I torqued down the intake manifold bolts, talked a little bit about how I set up my gaskets and how everything went on the top of the motor. But I'd have to say that I didn't say in the last one before I put this Dizzy in. This is my billet distributor from Performance Products, and it is a good compromise, Professional Products, and it's a compromise with the $300 unit from MSD. This one is, billet. It's nice. I have a video of how to set it up and lock out the timing, but it's a really nice piece, and steel gear, and the on the roller motor from a 87 to 93 5.0 that's been converted to 347. So a lot of those little details, make sure you're watching those things. But on the torque, I have to say that if you're following along and you're going to do this, I went around with the torque wrench. I got there sitting on the pump, my air pump, and the torque wrench actually had to go around. When I did the star pattern, I had to go around about 4 times. The torque spec on an aluminum head 302 is 18 foot-pounds. That torque wrench can be loose in the handle sometimes, so just to make sure I was right where I needed to be, I did like 19-20 foot-pounds, and then I went around and did the star pattern. But I noticed that as it cinched down onto those gaskets, there's a little bit of cork under there. These gaskets over here are Felpro. They have a little bit of sealant on them, so as the sealant and everything settled down, I went around in that star pattern 4 times. The third time I still felt like I was getting a little bit of movement at the 18-19 foot-pound mark on my torque wrench. So I went around another time. So just make sure as you're cinching that thing down, you realize that you are pushing against some RTV, some cork, and some other things, and it's settling each time you go in the star pattern all the way around the intake manifold. So a little follow-up on the video there. I do have a hardened. It's not an ARP brand, but it's a hardened oil pump shaft. And so I'm sliding trying to do this one-handed. The oil pump shaft's down in there. We have to, that slid right in there. Centered it up, and the center of the oil pump shaft will be right on the Dizzy. There's nowhere for it to go because the machining in the block won't allow that oil pump shaft to fall out of its place. So this slides down over it. Kind of show you what I'm looking at here. There's if you can see that, there's kind of a little opening, and it's a hex, almost like you'd find on a screwdriver. It's the hex. I think, I don't remember the sizing of it, but it's identical to you can kind of see the metal shiny there. Inside there's a little tipped, pointy tipped oil pump drive shaft. And as you slide this down in there, it'll center it because it's pointy, and then it'll go in there and center it up for you. So it should drop right in, shouldn't have any resistance. The gear on there will line up. I already pre-fitted a lot of this before I did this video. So now it's fighting me a little bit, but if we can just spin it until it drops in there. Yeah, okay, that's what I was trying to show you. Yeah, it doesn't always just drop right in, but if it doesn't, it fights you a little bit. That's okay. It's going to give you a little hard time. Just the engine stand here gives a little bit, so I'm going to move it over, see if I can get that rod to move around in there. Well, that worked a little too good. Ah, there it goes. Ah, there. I was almost there. There we go. Okay, so it's snug down now, and this is also how you can advance your timing. Turning this left or right in there allows you to move where this location is of your points. As it hits each spark plug, you can actually advance your timing or reduce or retard your timing by moving this. So that's why Ford set this up, that even in the Fox body cars, you don't need a chip or anything. If you've got if you have a proper setup by using like a Pro M, and you're building this car for a Fox body with the intake manifold, get you like an 80mm throttle body and use a proper Pro-Am chip on that end. Your computer should not need chipped. It's by stock spec. It's going to make up for where you set your timing here by moving this on the stock Fox body, and by having a proper Pro-Am intake. When it comes out of there, you'll have the tube off to the left here, and in that tube has your I use Pro-Am, but there's other brands, and you can actually set up how big your throttle body is and what size injectors you have. So if you have that set up properly, that is your chip. You don't need an American Muscle chip. I don't believe a lot of those things that adjust timing from those chips are actually even necessary. A lot of guys on the forums and things will tell you that you don't need it. So as long as you have a proper setup intake chip that goes to your sensor there in your intake, and then it's set up for the adjustment on your whatever fuel you're running, whatever fuel injector size, that is in and of itself enough to help the computer along to get it where it needs to be to make your car running rich or lean and make it proper. The other thing is that you need to check that with a wideband to make sure that you are not running too lean or too rich to ruin your cylinder heads. But all of that stuff I'll leave up to you guys and the professionals and the veterans on the forum. But for this car, we're running a Phytech unit, and all of that stuff I don't have to worry about. So I locked this out for Phytech or for Easy EFI. I got a 2-wire setup. There's just a magnetic pickup in here inside this housing, and then that'll go to the Phytech. But I do have it sit down in there. It's down in there, and then I have my Ford Performance. Bought this from Ford. Dealership sells them. I bought it on LMR.com. Another product plug there, and it is a 1/2-inch bolt, just like the stock one. But I have a chunky metal one that I had on the old engine. But since I'm building a really pretty engine, I'm not putting junk on here. I mean, I have some used parts on here, but for the most part, you can understand when I'm doing my build, I'm making sure I'm using good parts like these ARPs. I reuse these. There may be a few things here and there I reuse, but for the majority of the engine, I did buy new stuff. So, got a shiny chrome timing adjustment here on the Ford roller block from the early 90s. I also did a chrome. I took a stock timing pointer and had it chromed, and then I used these recessed head bolts all along the engine that cost me about $5. You don't need to spend $70, $80, $90 on new bolts for the water pump cover, especially if you're running like a March setup, a March pulley setup. All these bolts are recessed head, and they're super cheap at Fastenal. So anything on this motor I tried to shine up. I did reuse the timing cover, and then the water pump's new, but the timing cover was pretty aged looking, so I shot it with aluminum colored engine tint paint. So you can see, try to keep up the shine as much as I could on this thing. I will time this engine once I get it on the dyno, and we'll have this all set up, so I'm going to kind of leave this loose. But I really wanted to hit some things on this video about setting up your distributor, how that went in. I also talked about how the intake manifold required a little bit of extra attention to how you torque it down so that that gasket compresses properly and that you have a good seal all the way around your block. And the next portion will be to add on to the intake manifold the water, the housing for the thermostat, which I'm going to put on next. Alright, so the radiator and thermostat housing all kind of are, this is an LMR piece. The Ford one will have Ford stamped on it, but it's very similar. And the old one just wasn't pretty enough for me, so I wanted to put this together and make it nice. I bought a Ford Performance or Ford part number thermostat, and this is 180 degree. I want my engine to run a little warm and to a lot of guys, will run a little bit less than that, but that's a stock 180 degree thermostat, and that'll allow me to stay within emissions. If you're gonna run this on an emissions vehicle, but this doesn't really matter. I just wanted to stick with a stock temperature, and also I'm running heat on my Cobra kit car, and I want it to be warm, so this is going to be 180 degrees. The direction of this doesn't have it actually labeled. My other thermostat had kind of a smaller housing on it with some holes drilled in it, and it said towards the radiator. So you just, when you're looking at this, just point this towards the radiator. The pointy end goes towards the radiator, and then the spring end goes towards the block, kind of like that in there. So always look at the pointy end, and that's going to be the one that goes towards the radiator. The spring or the button in the back will always go towards the block, and that's the flow that it gets. And then I'm going to slide that in there with a gasket and some some engine assembly from AC Delco, and assemble that. And I am going to run a little bit of extra RTV on these, because these are known to leak around this edge. If this machining isn't giving a little bit when it sits in there, it may actually allow it to leak, because this won't seal against this. But I'm going to run I'm going to put a gasket on there, and I'm going to run gasket sitting right there, and I'm going to run a little bit of RTV, and that'll make up for that loss, and then that'll allow me to put it on there and not leak. And I'll get back to you in just a second. We'll take a shot of that.